All right, let's give it a shot where we're actually trying to 3D print something. So I have one of my puzzle pieces. Let's just take this as a random part file and send it to the 3D printer. So the first step on Inventor is pretty easy. If I want to print paper, I'd go to print, but I don't want to print paper. I want to do something 3D printed related. So if I go to 3D print preview and click on that button, all I need to do is check two settings inside my options. So if I go to my options, I want my units to be in millimeters, even though I designed possibly in inches. The conversion is going to be in units of millimeters, and I want this resolution button to be set to high so that all my, if I have curves or something like that, it's all smooth shaped. That's it. So I'm going to press OK on that, and then over here, a hidden kind of a hard to find button says Save a Copy As. Ultimately, this is an intermediate file that takes my part file and makes it 3D printer compatible. I often dump these on the desktop, so I just did a drop-down list and went to the desktop so I can easily find this thing, and it was called the blue puzzle piece. It's no longer called an IPT, now it's an STL, which is super typical file type for 3D printing. So I'm going to just press save, and let's see, so I didn't want it in a subfolder, press save. So I'm done with Inventor. So once I have my part file and I do those two options settings and save it, now I have a file on my desktop on my main screen that's called Blue Puzzle. So the next program that needs to be opened in order to make it completely compatible with being executed by the 3D printer is a program called Prusa Control, which allows me to actually control the 3D printer, or at least set up the commands that it's going to walk through to complete the print. These settings are not super difficult. I'm going to walk it through once quick, where these are the settings I'd like you to use the first time through. So now we have a deck that represents our 3D printing surface. So I'm going to go and find and import the actual file that we just dumped onto the desktop. In my case, it was my blue puzzle piece. Blue puzzle. So just make sure you know what your puzzle is called. Piece. So there's my blue puzzle piece. One thing to note is that it's going to print from the deck, the grid, and move up. So if I have hollows, I may need to support it with extra material, but this one's pretty straightforward, where it's going to print on the deck and just move up, 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 and it's not going to have any issues trying to print on something that doesn't have support underneath it. I am always going to make this draft, meaning the thickness of my actual layers is going to be fat, so it prints out quicker. So if we have a lot of people wanting to print, we want these things to happen pretty quick. And then somewhere around a 10-15% fill rate, meaning most of it's actually, so if I picked 15%, 85% air, only 15% plastic, that's typically enough strength for most parts, especially if they're not a structural part that needs strength. Other than that, I'm going to hit generate, and it's going to take a few seconds for it to actually translate that into a different language called G code. And then I could actually walk through it and see what the actual printer is going to do. So every layer that it prints, it's going to look like that. So that's how we can see that most of it, the dark orange is just plastic, and then most of it is actually just empty space, where that's going to provide it with enough strength, especially for a puzzle that wouldn't be needing to be very strong. It also tells us that we need about an hour and a half to print this. It's one of the bummers about 3D printing, is it takes a little while to print. And then the last step I would follow would be to save the G code. So here's where I need to use an SD card that's present in the 3D printer. So I'm going to put that in an adapter, stick it into my laptop, and when I hit save G code, I'm going to have to look. So honestly, one thing that you might want to do is to save the G code on the desktop. So just dump this file on the desktop so that you know the actual file is set and ready to go. So you can just put it on your desktop and press save, and then make sure you give it enough time for it to say that it's done. And then you'll have the second file. So we had an STL file that came straight out of Inventor. Now we have something called G code that the 3D printer actually understands. I need to get that onto an SD card, and then I simply execute it on the 3D printer. So I would be plugging into my computer. If you're using a laptop, there's actually an SD card reader built into it. But if you're on a PC, you need to use an adapter. Just talk to Hildebrand about that, and he can get you the SD card onto your computer to transfer it over.